In today's episode of the Let's Talk Psychology podcast, we're taking a closer look at why many bright kids grow up feeling lonely and overwhelmed as adults. This audio includes subtitles so you can follow along more carefully and take in the ideas at your own pace. Why do so many intelligent children eventually feel stuck, disconnected, and isolated? These were the kids expected to succeed early. They were praised, encouraged, and told they were destined to excel. Yet somewhere along the way, that promise shifted. The praise slowly became pressure, and now many of those same children, once seen as exceptional, are having a hard time navigating adulthood. They can't seem to find direction, feel socially out of sync, and often struggle to begin tasks, stick with them, or build meaningful relationships. And the most confusing part is that they don't know why. On the surface, nothing seems wrong. They're still capable, still quick thinkers, but inside, there's a steady feeling of being separate from others, like life is moving forward for everyone else while they remain on the sidelines. And there's a reason this happens. Many smart kids grow up tying their entire identity to their intelligence. When that becomes the foundation of how they see themselves, the quality that once gave them confidence becomes the very thing that limits them later. So let's talk about why this happens, and more importantly, how to undo it. Because this isn't about failure. It's about a coping style that worked in childhood, but stopped being effective over time. Once you understand how you ended up here, you can begin finding a way forward. When we're young, our sense of identity tends to be simple. Children often hold on to one or two traits and use them to define who they are. A kid might think of themselves as someone who likes Pokemon or someone who eats chicken nuggets. It's basic and one-dimensional, but that's normal. Early identity forms from interests or labels. And one of the strongest labels a child can receive is, "You're smart." That phrase sticks. It gets repeated by teachers, parents, and peers, and it becomes a major part of how the child understands themselves. For a while, it feels great. Being smart brings attention, approval, and a sense of ease. You don't have to study as hard as others, you understand things quickly, and you stand out in comparison. But there's a hidden downside. When adults praise a child for being smart, they're usually praising effortless achievement, not effort. You were complimented for solving problems quickly, earning high grades without studying much or understanding lessons right away. Over time, this leads to a risky belief. If I'm smart, things should feel easy for me. And this belief quietly disrupts life later on. Because as soon as something becomes difficult, when you fail, when you don't get it right away, when you can't immediately perform, it doesn't feel like a normal challenge. It feels like your identity is being questioned. You start thinking, if I'm supposed to be smart, why is this hard for me? So instead of facing challenges, you pull back. You avoid raising your hand unless you're certain. You skip activities unless you're confident you'll do well. You avoid trying new interests because they might reveal areas where you're not naturally gifted. And slowly, your world gets smaller. You stick only to what you already excel at. You stay within familiar limits. You protect the image of the smart kid instead of exploring new skills. And that's where the trap begins. Because while everyone else is out experimenting, trying, failing, improving, you stay hidden inside a shrinking comfort zone. The longer you stay there, the harder it gets to step out. Eventually, you notice you've wrapped your identity around something that now feels unstable. You tell yourself you can't risk failure, looking foolish, or jeopardizing what you've built, so you freeze. That's when isolation creeps in. When you stop growing, you also stop connecting. Connection grows from shared activities, being part of a team, enduring awkward phases together, or working hard toward a goal. If you keep opting out of those situations, removing yourself from places where people bond, you miss the moments that form real friendships. You don't join the club because you're afraid you'll be bad at it. You skip the sport because it's unfamiliar. You avoid group projects because they're annoying. Little by little, you step out of the social current, but you still want connection. So you fall back on what you do know, your intellect. Instead of relating, you try to understand people from a distance. You analyze, observe, and run mental simulations. That creates cognitive empathy. You can logically grasp what others feel without actually engaging emotionally. It helps to a point. You can manage conversations. You can keep up socially. You may even appear charming. Underneath, though, you're drained. Because being with people becomes a calculation. You're always planning what to say, how to respond, predicting their thoughts. Socializing turns into another arena where you must perform, and to avoid failing at that, you avoid it altogether. Loneliness deepens. You're smart, so you try to fix this with reason. Apply logic to emotional problems. Patch your self-worth with rational arguments. Write lists convincing yourself you're fine. Dissect your behavior until it's raw. None of it works. Intelligence wasn't built to heal inner pain. It's a tool for solving external problems, not for producing self-worth. Using it to feel okay just loops you back, because there is no purely intellectual solution to this kind of question. Am I enough? That question can only be answered on an emotional level, and for many high-achieving kids, emotional development is often the part that gets left behind. When the emotional discomfort gets too sharp, when the loneliness becomes overwhelming, the ego steps in with one last defense. You start telling yourself, I'm just different from everyone else. I don't connect because they don't think like I do. I'm too thoughtful for shallow interactions. Instead of admitting you feel isolated, you convince yourself you're above others. Not because you truly believe it, but because it hurts less than acknowledging you feel excluded. This is what we call defensive arrogance, and it's one of the most isolating habits you can develop. It builds a barrier between you and other people, and even when you want closeness, that barrier stops you from reaching out. Real connection demands humility, presence, and the willingness to be seen as you are. So how do you move past this? The first step, and it's essential, is letting go of the smart kid identity. Not because intelligence is negative, but because attaching your value to it becomes harmful. When your worth depends on succeeding easily, you begin avoiding effort, avoiding mistakes, and avoiding anything that might show you're not exceptional. You end up holding back your own progress just to protect the image, and eventually that image breaks. The answer is to create a new identity, not centered on being smart, but on being open to growth. You stop asking, what makes me look capable, and start asking, what actually helps me improve. You stop guarding your pride and learn to face discomfort. You allow yourself to try new things and not excel right away. You show up not just to win, but to participate. It's awkward. It's uncomfortable. It may feel like moving backward, but it isn't. It's the first meaningful step toward becoming whole. Your old identity told you your worth came from being exceptional. Your new one reminds you that your worth comes from being human. And being human means it's okay to be unsure, to learn slowly, to feel lost, to have no idea what you're doing half the time. The only real path forward is to take action anyway. Not perfect action, not clever action. Just honest, imperfect human effort. So if you feel stuck, numb, or consistently disconnected, if you've spent years trying to be the smartest person in every room, and now don't know who you are without that role, this is where you begin. You release the old narrative. You stop trying to impress. You start trying to be genuine. Because you don't need to be the smartest person in the room to belong there. You just need to be someone willing to show up even when it feels difficult, messy, or unfamiliar. And if you can do that, if you can stop holding on to the version of yourself that always needs to be above everything, you'll notice something you haven't felt in a long time. Connection. Not because you achieved it, not because you earned it, but because you finally stepped off the pedestal and into the space where real people live. And you may realize that this space isn't so bad. In fact, it's the only place where you can be truly seen, and more importantly, where you can finally feel at home. So if any part of this felt familiar, if you recognized yourself in these patterns or felt something click that you haven't been able to express before, leave a comment and share what resonated. And share. You're probably not the only one experiencing this. Sometimes naming the pattern is the first real step toward changing it. Thanks for listening to the Let's Talk Psychology podcast. Take care of your mind, and I'll see you in the next episode.